I personally feel that green and green thinking and green climate alarmism and all that is actually a very effective continuation of the Cold War against Western civilization, because it is making the Western world spend an awful lot of money to do very, very little about the climate.
This is Climate Debrief, brought to you by the CO₂ Coalition. I'm Angela Wheeler. Today you'll hear from a true trailblazer, CO₂ Coalition member Ed Hoskins. We'll discuss Ed's recent presentation entitled Negligible Future Warming from CO₂, CH4, and 2O. Ed Hoskins' career is a notable journey across disciplines. He qualified as a dentist at Guy's Hospital, London, then pivoted to architecture, earning an MA from Cambridge University. Ed then went on to found Applied Research of Cambridge, or ARC, one of the earliest spin-off software companies of the iconic Cambridge phenomenon. For 16 years, he led ARC to grow over 130 staff, delivering cutting-edge software for groundbreaking projects like Heathrow's Terminal 4, Boston's Big Dig, and even the mapping database for Australia's entire telephone network. From hospitals to global infrastructure, Ed's vision has left a lasting mark. Ed, thank you for taking the time to talk with us on Climate Debrief. Your title affirms that CO₂, carbon dioxide, CH4, methane, and N2O, nitrous oxide, have negligible future warming potential. What inspired you to frame your presentation with this powerful statement, and how does it set the stage for dismantling climate alarmism?
Well, a long time ago, it must have been about 2005 or something like that, I went to a climate deniers meeting, if you like to call it that, in the Houses of Parliament. And one of the things that struck me, but even before I went there, was a slide that showed that carbon dioxide, the effectiveness of carbon dioxide as a warming agent diminishes logarithmically from being very significant at low concentrations and virtually insignificant at high concentrations. And I remember raising this question at this meeting in the Houses of Parliament, and a lot of these people who were certainly anti the climate change agenda, they seemed to just dismiss it. And it struck me that it was the absolutely crucial fact that just made the whole climate alarmism game look utterly stupid. When I was in London, I cooperated with some colleagues at Imperial College, and we wrote a paper which related traffic and health in London. And this paper basically said London is a very clean place now. Well, it wasn't when I grew up as a little boy, but in 1952 or something, we had real smogs then. But now, or then, this is 25 years ago, London had a very clean atmosphere, was one of the cleanest cities in the world, and traffic was not a real health hazard. What happened then? This was published and it got some coverage in the press. And this annoyed green people immensely. And we started getting threats and all sorts of abuse, even a few death threats. How dare you say things like that? London's a clean place. And that suddenly struck me that there must be something really wrong if you give people good news and they threaten you. So I've been on a crusade ever since to look at that problem. And there's certainly one of the slides I've got here is one of the first slides that I ever saw that graph, which, as I said, as far as I'm concerned, negates any need to worry about carbon dioxide in the future. There's a whole industry now built up on the idea that carbon dioxide is a terrible pollutant. And it is so stupid and wrong that I've just become preoccupied by it.
You highlight that CO2's warming effect is 72% saturated at 420 parts per million, and that even doubling to 840 parts per million would cause minimal warming. Can you explain this insight in simple terms and why it so effectively debunks the fear of runaway global warming?
The warming effectiveness of CO2 is 72% saturated. You have to listen to Will Happer on this because he's much better at it than I am. But I believe every word he says, and he's a great man. He's done the physics to establish that the diminishing effect of CO2 is logarithmic. And as he said, you can paint a barn red, and if you paint it another time red, it might get a little bit redder. But if you keep on painting, it won't get any more red, if you understand what I mean. CO2 is a little bit different to that because it does diminish rather less precipitously than that. But it is diminishing, and it's a diminishing return the more CO2 you put in the atmosphere.
Ed, can you share how the positive effect of CO2 challenges the narrative that it's a harmful pollutant and supports a thriving biosphere?
Well, you've got to go back to elementary school biology for that. It's called photosynthesis. It's what makes plants work. And the more CO2 you have in the atmosphere, the better plants grow. It's so simple, logically simple anyway. It's a damn complicated process, and it's a hell of an amazing bit of evolution, in fact. But that is the effect. When plants evolved, or land plants evolved, the CO2 level was about 10 times or a bit more than it is now. The concentration, and they grew very well, and as a result, they lay down beds of coal, and that's basically because photosynthesis is carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight in a plant makes plants grow. It is really primary school biology. It should be so well understood that the idea that anybody with a scientific mind has construed the idea that, because carbon dioxide is indeed a greenhouse gas, it must be terrible if we put any more in. And that's the whole raison d'etre of the climate alarmism. We can't add any more CO2 to the atmosphere, it's going to fry us. When in fact, it is a process with absolutely diminishing returns as far as extra heating is concerned.
You argue that Western nations' attempts to reduce CO2 emissions are self-harming and pointless. How does this reality allow us to rethink the costly pursuit of net zero policies?
First of all, the only people who are in any way now interested in reducing their CO2 is about a third of the world's population, the developed world, and they are reducing their carbon dioxide emissions and in the process busily destroying their economies, which seems to me a very stupid idea. However, but the rest of the world, the developing world, is not going to stop improving its position and improving the well-being of its populations, because energy makes people prosperous and safer especially from the climate, of course. And it's perfectly clear that it is not doing any harm at all. It's gotten into the idea of people on the left, shall I say, that this is a wonderful way not only of controlling Western populations, but of degrading Western societies. And I think that that's exactly what is going on. First of all, those simple facts just negate any need to do anything. But they really should, if anybody was thinking rationally, should determine a radical reassessment of the whole climate alarmism situation. But there's a whole UN organization which is devoted to creating climate alarm. It's called the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They are really promoting an idea to destroy the economies of the Western world.
Your diagram showing CO2's modest contribution to the greenhouse effect is eye-opening. Can you walk us through how this perspective diminishes the alarm over CO2?
First of all, on the left-hand side, there's a set of vertical yellow bars, and those are the temperature contributions of each 10 parts per million of CO2 to temperature. And as you see, they're measured on this side up to 0.35 of a degree centigrade for the first 10 parts per million. And it diminishes radically, and you can just about see it on the right-hand side by just see those vertical bars only just on the right-hand side at 2,000 parts per million. This is the logarithmic diminution of the effectiveness of CO2. If you go further through the slide, plants can't survive at all below 150 parts per million. And at that level, they are very stressed. When we started our Holocene interglacial 12,000 years ago, the CO2 level had dropped to 180 parts per million, only 20% above the level which would have caused termination of plant life. That is the death of the world. The next vertical line is the nominal level before the pre-industrial age. And then the blue line here is where we are today. And this white line is the effect of doubling it. The grey squarish area, bottom of the slide, is the effect of water. And that is about, of the 33 degrees, that's about 31 degrees of the effect. So water is the most important greenhouse gas. And without it in the atmosphere, we would indeed fry. A, we wouldn't survive, and B, we would actually be very cold, because you need that 30 degrees of greenhouse effect to keep the Earth habitable at all. Now, the next, further up, there's a blue line straight across, and then a purple line straight across. That is the effect of nitrous oxide and of methane. Those cumulatively give you about 0.4 of a degree centigrade. And they stay consistent because as soon as they're released into the atmosphere destroys them. And so there's only very small residual effects left from methane and nitrous oxide. Nitrous oxide is, in fact, much more powerful greenhouse gas than methane. It's about 300 times more powerful than CO2. And it's whereas methane is about 12 times more powerful than CO2. Anyway, that's what those two very thin lines up here are. And then the orange shows the effect of CO2 up to the current level. And then just above that current level, there's a stripy bit, and that is the increase above the current level that CO2 might produce at increasing concentrations. So if we got to equilibrium climate sensitivity, which is nominally double what you've got at the moment, you would be up to about a saturation of 85%. So there's not much more that can be done. But then it's further on from that, it's diminishing returns. And this graph goes on to 2,000 parts per million. It would take about, at the current rate of growth of CO2 in the atmosphere, it would take about 150 years to get to the equilibrium level. And then, because it's a logarithmic curve, it would take, from that level, it would take, to get to a doubling again, would be the same temperature increase. And so that's what this slide is all about. It basically shows the proportions of water vapor and then the other three major greenhouse gases. And you can see, first of all, that increasing temperature is marginal from CO2 in comparison with water vapor, and the other two are truly marginal. The point is that which is the thing I like to try to do, which is to show the proportionality and show the scale of these different things. Sure, CO2 is a greenhouse gas, and it has contributed about 1.5 degrees, and that's very nice because the world is a bit warmer for it. And a warm world is a better world for people and the biosphere than a cold world. People who have a religious view of these things, you just cannot tell them that they may be wrong.
Ed, how does this illustration help the public grasp the overstated role of CO2 in climate change narratives?
I personally feel that green thinking and green climate alarmism and all that is actually a very effective continuation of the Cold War against Western civilization, because it is making the Western world spend an awful lot of money to do very, very little about the climate. We are talking trillions of dollars that has been spent already, and if they keep on going, there'll be more and more and more trillions of dollars to be spent. Nominally to save the planet, but in fact, just to piss it away. It's like a very wonderful way to damage Western civilization. For some reason, the UN feels that, and they have said that the whole climate alarmism game is not actually about the climate at all. It's about wealth distribution, which is also very interesting. I'm sure you read that before somewhere. But the problem is that the science in the IPCC reports is generally competent, but the politicians write the summaries, and the summaries basically promote climate alarmism. And they've been doing it, it's COP30. They've been doing it for 30 years now, trying to tell the world that civilization is going to kill the world. I think it's actually not. Even Bill Gates now thinks it's not going to kill the world.
This visual underscores the diminishing warming effect of CO₂ as concentrations rise. How can this evidence encourage our viewers and listeners to question the urgency of CO₂ reduction efforts?
This is the same slide, the same graph as was on the earlier one with the yellow bars for each 10 parts per million. This is the slide that got me going right at the beginning 25 years ago, I suppose. And from this, I deduced that there was absolutely nothing that could be done, or changing the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere, or trying to, would have no effect at all on the climate. And that's where that starting point came from. This is the graph that started me off thinking there must be something horribly wrong here. And this is the graph I was referring to at this meeting in the Houses of Parliament, because it seemed that the, quotes, climate deniers hadn't really cottoned on to how very important this was for their argument. And there were a lot of very, very interesting people there. Were people like Ian Plimer and Donna Laframboise, and so on. A lot of the good and the great amongst the deniers. But somehow I asked the question, doesn't this really negate things? And they didn't seem to really grasp that this is the killer. This effect is why it's not a problem.
Ed, here your presentation highlights the small temperature contributions of minor greenhouse gases like methane and nitrous oxide.
Two views of the same data, except the second one on the right, I've taken out the effect of water. So you can then see magnified the effect of these three greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrogen dioxide. In the process of demonizing these gases, which are destroyed automatically in the atmosphere, you can even see, if you go to a swamp at night, you could actually see the methane coming out of the swamp and oxidizing, burning above the swamp. It's called will-o'-the-wisp. And nitrous oxide is very dilute in the atmosphere and will stay dilute because it's purged automatically by oxidation in the atmosphere, just like methane. Now, carbon dioxide, it is oxidized, so it's an oxide of carbon. Simple as that. But this is basically just to say these are both the same data sets, just at different scales.
So your analysis here further minimizes the role of minor greenhouse gases. How does this reinforce your broader argument that the climate impact of human emissions is vastly overstated?
Because the climate alarmists have for 30 years have wanted to scare people rigid that civilization is going to destroy the planet. As I said, even Bill Gates doesn't think that anymore. I'd like to spend some time on this one. The background of the slide, from black on the left to bright green on the right, indicates the productivity of plants as a result of carbon dioxide. First of all. Secondly, if carbon dioxide were to drop below 150 parts per million, plants would not survive. They just cannot survive with less than that amount of CO₂ in the atmosphere. But at that level, 150 parts per million, the effect of carbon dioxide is over half saturated, 53% saturated. And then the next vertical line shows the level, how close we were to losing life on Earth at the beginning of the Holocene interglacial. The next line is the nominal value pre-industrial level, at which it's 64% saturated about. The current level, it's about 72, 73% saturated, which means there's a little bit to go, but you've got to go a very long way to achieve it in terms of concentration of carbon dioxide. So you can reckon that the difference between plant survival and the pre-industrial level of 280 was about 0.3 of a degree centigrade. And the uplift from the start of the Industrial Revolution to now is about 0.2 of a degree centigrade. These are very small numbers. They are immeasurable in terms of the climate. And then after that, if you want to double it again to 840, which, as I said, would take about 150, nearly 200 years at the current rate of growth, that would be only another third of a degree centigrade. Now, these are very small numbers. The alarmist view has always been that as you increase the warming from carbon dioxide, that actually evaporates more water from the sea, and that escalates the whole process. So that's the way that they model up to another 4 degrees centigrade by the end of the century. I think my values are very conservative. There are other models and other values which are less conservative, but at the absolute outside, doubling it is not going to cause more than a degree centigrade. And a degree centigrade is just the ability to grow more crops, more places become arable, and to kill less people with the cold. So it's gone back to the old game, how dare you say the things are getting better when the consensus wants to say they're getting worse? The orange is the carbon dioxide and the stripy bit is the extra. And because the other two gases, methane and nitrous oxide, are purged automatically by oxidation and the action of the atmosphere, then they're going to stay stable anyway. And what's interesting is that there's all sorts of efforts, for example, to stop nitrous oxide release from farming and so on. And one of the things that's absolutely certain is if you stop nitrogen fertilizers, which is what these people are trying to do, on the grounds that it's going to cause terrible global warming, that will kill half the population of the world. It literally is that important. Nitrogen fertilization of crops is that important. Nitrogen fertilizers are made actually from natural gas, which is methane, believe it or not.
Thank you for watching. Please tune in next week to see the rest of Angela's interview with Ed Hoskins. If you enjoyed listening to this episode of Climate Debrief, please like, comment, and subscribe. We read all of your feedback. If you are interested in finding out more about the CO₂ Coalition and its mission, visit our website at co2coalition.org. Our host and executive producer is Angela Wheeler. Production by Ethan Audie and Scott Wheeler. Technical production and editing by Joseph von Spakovsky.